So we've recently received a leaked part of a World of Warcraft survey giving us a ton of really interesting information on potential future specializations to existing classes. Now I do actually think this survey is real because like a day before this was actually shown or leaked on Reddit and other areas, I actually got a World of Warcraft survey that I just started filling out, then my PC crashed and I completely forgot about it, but I'm assuming that survey would have actually gotten to this information somewhere within it. Now, besides this list of potential new specs being for existing classes, there are also new roles for those specific classes within a lot of these specs, and you'll see as we start to go through them, but a lot of them are incredibly interesting. Some of them have been things that have just been asked for like 20 years. So starting off, we have a healer hunter, and this is honestly something that I've been hearing about people kind of wanting since like Wrath of the Lich King. So utilizing a melee and ranged arsenal, team up with your pet to disperse bandages, medicines, and tinctures to those in need. Administer first aid to your team as you dart and weave along the battlefield with your pet complementing each heal with its own. Now, like I mentioned, this is legitimately something that people have kind of been wanting for just a long time. Just being like a hunter, running around with your pet and like giving people bandages and first aid. And this is something that could work. I'm not sure if this kind of theming around just running around bandaging people and giving them medicine and stuff is the best fit for World of Warcraft when all of the other healers are some form of magic, and magic just seeming to be in a thematic way much stronger than things like medicines or bandages or things like that. But I will say that the gameplay potential of your pet also healing somebody after you do every time is quite interesting, kind of having this like double heal thing where anytime you do something, maybe your pet and goes and does something like that. And then it also brings into question, would it just be like a normal pet? Would it just have like a new specialization for pets that's for healers? Or would it have to be a specific type of pet? Maybe only certain types of pets could actually be healers. But this is definitely something that people have kind of been talking about for a long time. And while thematically this is kind of one of the weaker ones, I do think this is something they could still add and people wouldn't be mad at. And then next up, we have support priest. This is one of those ones everybody would be fine with. This completely fits into the game, thematically fits perfectly. So this is definitely something I could see happening, a higher one on the list. So bless allies with inner fire, increasing their effectiveness in battle. Smite enemies with bolts of light to build up divine power, eventually performing holy words, which can burn enemies to ash. Now the description of this actually leaves a lot to be desired because it's basically just talking about other abilities that priests already have and just saying, yeah, you're going to use some of these abilities or have new abilities that just support people. But a support priest spec is actually something super interesting. There are multiple support specs on this list, and if any of those support specs end up being added into the game, I will be happy that they're continuing with the support specialization. I think having more supports would just make the game more interesting, and I know a lot of people that want support classes don't really want to play an evoker, so adding like a support to a priest or something like that would probably bring a ton of people into playing that specifically. And a priest is just kind of a shoo-in to get a support spec at some point if this is what they end up doing. And next up, we have a ranged DPS monk. Overload your inner spirit, manifesting your chi as crackling lightning bolts and sharp projectiles. Bends the flow of the target's own spirit, disrupting and unraveling them from within while maintaining their own perfect spiritual balance. Now, this is another one that thematically I think fits pretty well. You already have a lot of range things on different monk specializations. You obviously have your Jade Lightning that with different things throughout the game's history allowed you to do a bunch of different things, basically turning you into kind of like a green Palpatine. So there are a lot of elements of the monk that already fit well within this, but it's also pretty interesting that they're describing here that you're kind of debuffing targets, it sounds like you're disrupting the target's spirit and keeping yourself in balance. So it sounds like there may be some pretty big debuffing element here. And it also sounds like there may be like 2 different resources that you have to keep balanced to keep this monk balanced, probably keep your highest DPS. And maybe there are different abilities when you go too far into either direction of whatever the spiritual balance would be. So I think this one also fits thematically pretty well, and it sounded like it has some pretty interesting mechanics they're already thinking about. And next up, we have a spec that I think would be most sought after by the player base, and most likely if we got the winners of this survey, it would probably be this spec. And this is a tank shaman. Master the element of earth, raise boulders as physical shields or to shatter against your enemies, manipulate terrain to hinder and disable enemies, and harness the earth's latent energies to fortify and empower yourself. This is just a complete shoe-in, and as we go more and more into the list, you'll also see that there are some inspirations from Season of Discovery. They had some of the things on this list, specifically Tank Shaman being one of them, and Shaman kind of seemed like it was supposed to have a tank spec since like Classic. A bunch of the different things throughout, let's say Enhancement Shaman, just seemed to be like tanking abilities. Some of them almost specifically were back in vanilla that were later removed. So a Tank Shaman just using earth, obviously being this much more protective element, is just something that thematically fits super well. Seems to have been something that was being designed back in the day, and it's just something that players would very much want. A tank shaman would just be super cool, and I main a shaman, so I would definitely be playing tank shaman quite a bit as well. This is definitely the one on the list that if I had to choose which would have the highest probability of being added first, it would probably be tank shaman, just because we haven't had a new tank since Demon Hunter, and this is something that just fits so thematically. And then next up, we have a tank rogue. Now this is something that's actually been talked about for a long time as well. Back in the day in Classic, when nobody knew how to play, people would try to utilize rogues to tank using some of their defensives, and then thematically this can kind of work. I know back in the day, I think in like Alpha of World of Warcraft, there were also, I think, bucklers, which were like a different type of shield that rogues could also use. So it may have been an idea back then to actually have rogues as a tank, and having a tank that's built completely around like avoiding attacks instead of actually getting hit by something is also a bit interesting compared to the tanks we have now. Most tanks in retail World of Warcraft now are massive damage reductions and massive healing. There's not really anything that's kind of heavily utilized around just avoiding every attack, dodging and parrying and things like that. So this says deft duelists who use their precision for protection, deflecting blows with parries and quick dodges. They utilize poisons to weaken their foes and tinctures mid-battle to restore their health. So again, this is something that thematically can work. And while this is something that I think has been talked about since vanilla World of Warcraft and even in alpha, I do think this is lower on the list, just because if you probably ask most players about a lot of the things on this list, which ones they would want over other ones, while tank rogue thematically fits, I do think it would be lower on the list. I don't think tons of rogue players would really want this specifically, and while it would be something new and potentially interesting, I just think this is probably something that'd be lower on the list to be added compared to a lot of these other potential specs. And then we have a bit of a weird one that is also thematically fitting, but is kind of weird in that I don't think I've really seen a lot of people ask for something like this or really be interested in it very much. And this is a ranged DPS priest, a holy version. A radiant caster that scorches foes with searing smites and consecrating flames, ascend into an angelic form, channeling pure, unbroken beams of celestial radiance that pierce through ranks of enemies. Now, the description of this, I think, makes it sound much more cool than I think a lot of people would originally think. Now, a holy-based DPS spec is kind of already built in a little bit into priest. Even if you go back to older versions of World of Warcraft, like vanilla or the first couple expansions, I think priest being able to like spam smites or do other damaging abilities was a bit more rare when it came to healers. You obviously have discipline that is already a healer that heals through doing damage, even though I think in the past they were more focused on that. So a holy DPS priest still makes sense, but when they start talking about unbroken beams of celestial radiance, that sounds much more cool than you would originally think. Like just kamehamehaing huge holy beam through like a whole pack of enemies as AoE could be quite interesting. And as someone that really enjoys playing Shadow Priest, I think this could legitimately be a really fun and well-made thematic spec, even though like the Tank Rogue, I think this is lower on the list of things. But if they were to show off like some demos of some of the abilities of some of these specs, I assume a Holy DPS Priest would probably have some of the coolest looking abilities. And then we have another spec that's very thematic and just fits very well into how the class is built, a support paladin. Perform holy rites and channel the light to bestow potent blessings on allies. Consecrate their armor for resilience and their weaponry to strike precision and power, and bolster their spirits to amplify inner strengths. So a support paladin is just kind of a shoo-in of something that works and would work very well in World of Warcraft. You already have tons of things throughout paladins that already support everybody. Like, we've had auras for the entire history of World of Warcraft that were, I think, a lot more potent back in the day, but then you just have so many other abilities on all of the paladin specs that are super supportive already. All of your different blessings that you can just put on other players. You already have so much support elements that I think a support paladin probably wouldn't be very hard to make. You just pretty much give every supporting elements from all of the other paladin specs, and you already have like half of a spec built out right there. So I think this would probably be one of the easier ones for the developers to make. It's definitely a shoo-in for something that would work and players would be interested in, and I would probably put this one more towards the top of the list. There are definitely some things that would be much more wanted than a support paladin and much more hyped, but I do think this would be more towards the top of the list than some of the other specs. And next up, we have a spec that also has a bunch of history to it in older versions of the game, a tank warlock. Back in, I think, like vanilla and even TBC, you would have warlocks tank in certain fights. You also obviously have their pets that can also tank, just kind of like a hunter, but warlocks being this like spellcaster tank would also be a pretty interesting thematic spec. So channeling fellow energy through maces and runed shields, these warlocks ward themselves and their allies from damage. They command a host of demons, siphoning their essence for vitality, binding their souls to share incoming damage, or unleashing them in waves to overwhelm their enemies. And what's also really interesting is it says here maces and runed shields. That's also pretty interesting because that's not something you would normally think of a warlock having, a mace and a rune shield. I'm wondering if they would just have shields and you would have like an enchant or like a rune you put on your shield at all times that does something very defensive for you, but then you would obviously have your different demons you could summon that you can then soul bind yourself to, so you're like sharing damage with a bunch of different demon summons. This could actually be a pretty interesting playstyle of a mix of a caster, a tank, and some elements of a demonology warlock. So instead of just having like the one demon with you, maybe as part of your rotation you keep summoning a bunch of different demons where you just obviously link your life together. So like as you keep taking damage, these demons you're summoning are like taking parts of that damage for you. Then obviously having this like rune enchanted shield, you could increase your defensives by quite a lot. You could curse different enemies to make them deal less damage to you. So there's a lot of different things that just kind of fit with having a tank warlock. And next up, we have a spec that I think would be a dark horse, a ranged DPS Death Knight. Now, this is something that just sounds so cool to me. After a tank shaman, this is probably the thing on this list I would want the most. And that's just because I main shaman. If I main Death Knight, I would probably just want this because it sounds so cool. Unleash the powers of a Lich, wielding necrotic and frost magic to torment the souls of your enemies. Conjure corrupting phantasms, grasping hands, and chains of ice to assail your foes while avoiding death yourself within your phylactery. Now, there's just so many cool elements to this that if they're going to be adding additional specs like this list, this is just something that sounds like it would be one of the first ones added because it sounds like the people developing it will love it so much. You're basically becoming a Lich. Obviously, Liches and Death Knights have a lot of different things in common. As a Death Knight, you already have so many different ranged abilities as a melee anyway. There's so many different things that could fit, but then also having the elements of just being a Lich, summoning other phantasms to help you, avoiding death within your phylactery is just also super interesting. Having a mechanic that you like die, but then pop into your phylactery, and after like a certain amount of time you resurrect or something. In PvP, that could be something that's destroyable. In a lot of MOBAs, you have mechanics like that, where there will be a character that you kind of kill once and then they go into like an egg or something else like that, and then you have to kill them within that egg to actually kill them or they resurrect. There's just so many cool things with the possibility of this spec. This is definitely something that I think would be highest on the list. It may even be highest on the list after this would be like described to people that you're just playing as a Lich essentially. That's something that's just incredibly cool. And then we have something that, again, was probably inspired from Season of Discovery. We have a healer mage. Use your arcane magic to alter the reality of time to cure the wounds of your allies. Preemptively react to enemy combat by shielding and buffing allies with potent elemental magic. Now, thematically, I think this works pretty well. Being able to alter magic, so someone takes a bunch of damage, you change the flow of time on them to undo that damage. You're an arcane mage, so you definitely have a bunch of different shields. You could probably have some buffing and other arcane magics that could help with this. There are definitely a lot of thematic elements that fit really well within a healer mage, but I'm not sure how popular this would be. I think if you just ask people if they want a healer mage, a lot of people that would try it out would probably be like, yeah, that sounds cool. But compared to a lot of things on this list, I think it'd be definitely lower on the list, even though I think thematically and gameplay wise, it can make a pretty good healer spec. I do think some of the other things on this list are just much more interesting. I do think it is a good chance that they will start to add more specs to existing classes because it just helps fill out the fantasy of those classes, and people have been playing the classes for so long that they would absolutely love new specs. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.